Huh? 700 miles from here. Well, I was going to, I go to Florida. Took you 2 hours. Yeah, I drove to Florida and then my brother drive first. Oh, you couldn't do it all by yourself. Too old for that. About 10:30 last night. Oh. Good weather. You left Tuesday. My brother's church. New lesson broke up. New lesson broke up.
What class are you in? Did you sign up for one?
Signed up for that.
Did that matter?
Yeah.
How are you?
That's right.
How are you?
We went last night. We were here. Three brothers and sisters.
Did you get to that call? And I haven't really been yet. Oh, really? Our farmer didn't pump any water in the field for some bad
Anybody in the Matthew class next? The Matthew books are up here. If you need it after class, you can grab them. I got them up here. Yeah, they have the books up here. I guess it's in this room up here. I assume. Yeah. Rob, would you mind saying the story before we start? We're going to get started since it looks like everybody's up here. Only a couple minutes from. Before we begin, let's start with the word of prayer.
Almighty God, we're so thankful for this Lord's Day that you blessed us with. We're thankful for this class that we have to come together and study your word. Pray that you be of care as you lead us this morning. Father, we're thankful for the many lessons that we've learned this quarter from David and Saul and many of the Bible characters that are great characters of faith. Father, help us to learn from those positive attributes from them. Help us to apply those things in our lives. Help us to encourage and love one another, Father. We pray all these things through Jesus Christ. Amen.
I wasn't able to stream much of the class on Wednesday because they got new cameras in, and apparently the camera's right there now, and it looks down at you. And microphone wasn't working for the first 45 minutes of the class, and the last 5 minutes it worked fine. But so I finally gave up trying to read Gary's lips. But we it sounds like he had a good study, and he went through several chapters here, and most, as we know, is mostly about the having to do with the temple. But today we're going to continue on with chapters 9 through 11, and we'll start off with a little bit of review and then go over each individual chapter. We'll start off with a little review on the first 8 chapters. I just wanted to point out some highlights of what we've looked at so far. You remember Adonijah was one of David's sons, and he had proclaimed himself to be king. And we find out that that wasn't God's plan, and it wasn't David's plan either. And we see that Solomon was proclaimed as king by David, and he was anointed as such. So we've been talking mainly about Solomon during this part of our lesson. We see that David dies, and then we have Solomon praying for wisdom to God, and God says he'll bless him. How does he say he'll bless him? When he asks for wisdom?
Give him what he asked for, but along with that, all the other things that normal men would have that.
Riches and wealth and the fame, and he also promises him one other thing. If he's obedient to God, what does he promise him?
His line, kingship.
Okay. But he what about him physically, just him personally? What did he promise him? Well, yeah, long life. He promised him even a really rich, long life if he obeyed his commandments. And then we see that he builds the temple. That takes about 7 years, and then he builds his own house, which takes almost twice as long, a lot bigger, a lot more extravagant. Which I don't know if Gary mentioned anything about that on Wednesday night, but and then at the end of here in chapter 8, we see that there was a dedication of Solomon to the Lord. He gives a benediction, and then actually does quite a few sacrifices to God here, which is I don't think you've gotten to that, but if you look at the numbers here in chapter 8:62, he says Solomon offered a peace offering to the Lord, 22,000 oxen and 120,000 sheep. And I've never, that's such a huge number. It's really kind of hard to imagine, but that was a big ordeal. And we see that, but Solomon is praising God and offering him. He was allowed to build this temple of God that he refused to let David do. I picked up a couple of images of what artist thinks that it looks like, but now it's just a kind of a heap, and it's just an archaeological find now. But that's one artist rendering of what the temple looked like. And then when you break it down, you remember the descriptions of all the gold that there was. A lot of gold, bronze pillars, and all kinds of things with the altar and all the other things that was with it. And the purpose of setting this class was not the specifics of the exact design and all that, but that Solomon wanted to build a house for God for worship, and we see that it was allowed to be done and was done. Was there any comments or questions on that?
It's interesting. I'd always thought the temple, I guess, was this bigger, grander place, so to speak. I mean, obviously it is grand with all the gold and everything, but if you think about it from a pure size and dimension standpoint, it's not that big. You could put 4 or 5 of them almost in our auditorium.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess I kind of, a while back, I always just thought it was really big. Not that, there's significance in bigness, but obviously the purpose is for God to have that solid home to be in their midst. So,
Right, and it wasn't for all the people. You know, all the people didn't go into this temple, right? It's just a select few. So it was built for what it was. But yeah, there was obviously a lot of gold that was used, and a lot of bronze, and all kinds of richly wealth that was used in the building of it. The way Solomon had envisioned it. When we get into chapter 9, we're going to see that starts off with the Lord appearing to Solomon, and again, remember he'd shown up to him first time in Gibeon and talked to him and kind of told him, you know, same things we just talked about, how what he had promised him. But let's read verses. Let's go read the first 9 verses of chapter 9. If somebody would like to read that for us.
And it came to pass, when Solomon had finished building the house of the Lord and the king's house, and all Solomon's desire, which he wanted to do, that the Lord appeared to Solomon that second time, as he appeared to him in Gibeon. And the Lord said to him, I have heard your prayer and your supplication that you have made before me. I have concentrated this house, which you have built, to put in my name forever. My eyes and my heart will be there perpetually. Now, if you walk before me as your father David walked, in the integrity of heart and uprightness, to do according to all that I have commanded you, and if you keep my statutes and my judgments, then I will establish the thrones of my kingdom over Israel forever, as I promised David, your father, saying, you should not fail to have a man on the throne of Israel. But if you or your sons at all turn from following me, and do not keep my commandments and my statutes which I have set before you, but go and serve other gods and worship them, then I will cut off Israel from the land which I have given them, and this house which I have consecrated for my name I will cast out of my sight. Israel will be a proverb and a byword among all people. And as for this house which is exalted, everyone who passes by it will be astonished and will hiss and say, why has the Lord done this land and to this house? Then they will answer, because they forsook the Lord their God, who brought their fathers out of the land of Egypt, and have embraced other gods and worshipped them and served them. Therefore the Lord has brought all this calamity on them.
All right, thank you. So God appears to him and tells him, you know, what the consequences are of obeying him and the consequences are disobeying him, and very specific about it. So he's warned and told that, you know, whether it be reward or punishment based on how his actions were. And that becomes very important as we see the rest of the acts of Solomon and how it progresses. We know that we talked about last week how Solomon had been promised wisdom greater than anybody in the world, and how he was to be really wise in his decisions and determine between right and wrong and making judgments. And so we see some examples here in these first 11 chapters of some of the things that Solomon did and was able to do based on that wisdom. But we also see that he's a man, and he was subject to, you know, sin and consequences of that. And starting with verse 10, we see that at the end of 20 years, you know, he had built the 2 houses, built the temple, he built his own palace, 7 and 13 years, and he went to give Hiram. We have we've seen this King Hiram before. Remember, he worked with David before, and we see that there's a second Hiram that's mentioned in here later. We'll talk about, but he had given him a gift of 20 cities, and talks the story here about how Hiram wasn't really pleased with the 20 cities that he got for whatever reason. That's a story that's mentioned in here. And then we see a story talking about Solomon, some of his drafting people and making basically slave labor. What do you notice about the slave labor that he uses for, the working of the kingdom?
They were the people that didn't, weren't conquered when they took the land.
Right. Yeah. So they weren't actually the people of Israel. They were all the other people, the foreigners that we see that were used as slaves. In verse 22 it says, "But of the people of Israel Solomon made no slaves. They were the soldiers, they were the officials, his commanders, his captains, his chariot commanders, and his horsemen." And this kind of reminded me going back to when the people were demanding a king, and Saul, they said, well, you're going to get a king, you're going to get what comes along with having a king. And these are the things that they're going to demand of you. So the people of Israel still had to contribute and do a lot of things, and fight in wars and things like that. But that was a consequence of them demanding a king. Any comments or questions on that?
Yes. There was something mentioned in verse 24, maybe in another verse, like 15, the Milo.
The Milo.
What is that?
The Milo was, we mentioned it earlier, about a month or two ago, in the city of David. It's a point, and I've looked it up a couple times, and I don't. Do you guys consider Milo? And when you went to Jerusalem, right? Yeah. It's like it's kind of like it was like a heap of stones, and I don't think I have a picture of it. But it was a heap of stones that was built up against the wall, and it's mentioned several times. I don't really know what its exact purpose was. Does anybody here know?
So they mentioned burning. They had burnt offerings and peace offerings, and it mentions that he burned incense with them on the altar. Was that a good thing, or was that a bad thing? He burning incense with their.
Which verse you talking about? Oh, on the
verse 25, right?
25.
Before, yeah.
I don't see any indication that it was a bad thing. I know there were a lot of things they were doing. We talked about how he had gone up to the high place to worship God, but the ark was still in Jerusalem, and so there's a lot of things going on here that weren't set up like it should have been. But once he built the temple and brought it up, things started to be done, I think, the right way. We also see at the end of chapter 9 that he built a fleet of ships, and so that's part of the kingdom's wealth and all that. That not only was he wealthy, but he had a large army, large ships, and could do all kinds of trade and things like that. And then we go into chapter 10. We have a story about the Queen of Sheba. And she's also referred to as the Queen of the South in Matthew 12:42. We'll talk about that here in a moment. But what does the Queen of Sheba do? What's the story here with her? Okay, she wanted to test Solomon. Right. So she came up to them and wanted to. She had heard reputation that he was very wise, and came testing him with hard questions. Verse 1. Did anybody else have riddles in theirs, or just hard questions? Anybody have anybody different? And she came with a big entourage, and came with spices and gold, precious stones, and he answered all the questions that she had on her mind. So she was testing him and asking him lots of questions, and he was able to answer all these. And she says in verse 6, "The report was true that I heard in my own land of your words, and of your wisdom, and I did not believe the reports until I came with my own eyes and had seen it. And then she had given a gift to King Solomon in return to her land. If you go over to Matthew, well, the story is also accounted in I got there, 2 Chronicles 9, 1 through 12. If you want to read a different version, but it's very similar to these passages here. But it talks about how she was impressed not only with his wisdom, but also the prosperity and the happiness of the people that work with him. And she ended up, blessing, the God of Israel when it was said and done. But if we go over to Matthew chapter 12 and verse 42, we have Jesus talking here, and he's talking about some of the signs of Jonah and how there was he says in verse 38, an evil and adulterous generation seeks for a sign, but no sign will be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. So we see this being talked about, we're prophesying about his own demise here. And we see then that says that the men of Nineveh will rise up at the judgment with the generation and condemn it, for they repented at the preaching of Jonah, and behold, something greater than Jonah is here. So they're talking about something greater than Jonah, and they're also talking about someone greater than Solomon. In verse 42 it says, the queen of the south will rise up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it, for she came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and behold, something greater than Solomon is here. So we have the wisest man that was on earth, that people and leaders came from outside the country to seek that wisdom, but yet the people of Israel, when they have somebody that is greater than Solomon, will reject that and not seek that wisdom and the truth. Yeah, Neil.
I think you probably mentioned that his knowledge and wisdom exceeded anything she'd ever heard about it.
Right. Yeah, and like the greatest of the time, but we see that when with Christ coming, that this we see that this is greater than Solomon ever could be. So that's just a comparison we see about Jonah and Solomon that was used by Jesus in chapter 12 of Matthew. Yes.
I just want to share just a little tidbit of something I ran into looking up Queen of Sheba. There are some legends in Ethiopia that she had a son with Solomon.
Oh, really?
And that son, Menelik or something like that, Menelik won like a king after Queen of Sheba in Ethiopia, and then somehow Solomon must have given the Ark of the Covenant to him, and they still think they have it.
Oh, really?
Today in Ethiopia. It's interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, I know it wouldn't surprise me if she did bear one of his children. The man who had how many wives?
700.
And how many concubines? 300. Yeah. All right. Any comments? Other comments on that? All right. Let's go on into chapter 10. Or we're in chapter 10. Let's go to the second part of chapter 10. What we see here now is a section that talks about Solomon's great wealth, and we won't talk about all the details on that. It's not that important, but we know that he's extremely wealthy. It says that in 1 year he had 666 talents of gold, but besides that, which came from the explorers. The gift, if you go back when, the gift of 120 talents that was mentioned earlier, I worked that out. That in today's dollar was about $18 million. Today's dollars, when you look at the weight of the gold. So 666 talents of gold, I imagine somewhere probably around 125 to 150 million dollars worth of gold.
Could be more than that, because that's like 50,000 pounds.
do the math. It's an enormous
No, you
amount.
can do the math.
Yeah, okay.
I'm not gonna do that.
I don't do math in public, sorry. All right. So, but we know he's extremely wealthy. Even he's so wealthy. What do they say about silver? What is said about the silver?
Didn't mean anything, it was common.
Yeah, it was just common, and yeah, it is. The value is about 1% of the value of gold, but it's still, considered a precious metal, somewhat of a precious metal, and worth something. But it became so common that it was just like any other commodity that they had in there that he had. But we see that he was extremely wealthy, and it talks a little bit about his chariots and his horsemen. And the passage I've put out here on the slide says, excelled all the kings of earth in riches and in wisdom. So not only was he the wisest, but he was also the richest in the land. Anything else on chapter 10? All right. So we're going to find here, though, that things kind of take a turn for the worse in chapter 11. We're going to see that Solomon turns from God. Let's read verses 1 through 8, if somebody could read that for us. Anybody want to read? Anyone?
But the king Solomon loved many foreign women, as well as the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites, from the nations of whom the Lord has said to the children of Israel, you shall not intermarry with them, nor they with you. Surely they will turn away your heart after the earth. Surely they will turn away your heart after their God. Solomon clung to these in love, and he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. For it was so when Solomon was old that his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not Lord to the Lord his God, as was the heart of his father David. But Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Saneans, and after Malcham, the abomination of the Ammonites. Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord, and did not fully follow the Lord, as did his father David. Then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, on the hill that is east of Jerusalem, and for the Molech, the abomination of the people of Ammon. And he did likewise for all his foreign wives, who burned incense and sacrificed to their God.
All right, thank you. There's a lot of tough words in there. So what do you think? What does that make you think about, when you see that the wisest man in the world, this happens to him? What's the lesson learned from that?
Blessed the flesh, blessed the eyes. Dangerous.
Yeah, no matter how wise we are, no matter how good of a Christian, we apply it to today, how good of a Christian we are and how faithful we are, even in our old age, we can be led astray, right?
Questionable.
Yeah, we're warned. He knew this. He was warned. Go back to Exodus 34, chapter 11, or verse 11. Exodus 34, we'll see some of the original discussion about this. And this was, I think this was after the second set of commandments, the second set of tablets that were made, given by God. And starting with verse 10, he said, behold, I will make a covenant before all your people. I will do marvels, such as have not been created in all the earth or in any nation, and all the people among you whom you are shall see the work of the Lord, for it is an awesome thing that I will do before you. Observe what I command you this day. Behold, I will drive out before you the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Take care lest you make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land to which you go, lest it become a snare in your midst. You shall tear down their altars and break their pillars and cut down their Asherim. For you shall worship no other God, for God, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God. Lest you make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land, and when they whore after their gods and sacrifice to their gods, and you are invited, you eat of his sacrifice, and you take of the daughters of your sons and their daughters whore after their gods, and make your sons whore after their gods. So it's pretty blunt there about this, about what's going to happen if you start intertwining with these other groups, and we see that through marriage, these foreign wives were able to actually pull them away from God.
So at some point he had to rationalize in his mind that he could interact with these people, and he was strong, and he was leader, and he was going to be okay. And so little by little, whether it was like Brother said, lust of the flesh, or what these women, he allowed that to tempt him, and once he started down the path, he couldn't turn back.
Right. And he was a leader for 40 years. So, spent the first 20 years, serving God and building the temple and doing the things. And somewhere in that last 20 years, we see that slow progression to where he got to this point in his old age that he was thrown away. Yeah.
Brother Solomon wrote in Proverbs, he said, you can't walk across hot coals without getting burnt. These women were like hot coals in his heart.
Right, yeah.
I wonder if that's the reason he wrote that. He learned, you can't walk across hot coals without getting burnt. So he knew that if he did this, what was going to happen. He knew what the consequences were going to be.
And in Ecclesiastes, it's all vanity.
Yeah.
If you don't have God, it's all vanity.
Yeah. That's why we kind of mentioned about the Solomon paradox. It still could be. It's not really a paradox because we're told that anybody can sin at any time. But Ron,
I was going to say it's almost unfathomable that this man with great wisdom can go after can just be drawn away like this. So I guess the lesson is that if great wisdom doesn't mean that you're automatically going to be spiritually obedient, I guess, because, we look at some in society today, whether they're professors or PhDs, and they have all this, quote, knowledge and wisdom, but yet they're atheists,
mm-hmm.
So I think it's a matter of, being obedient to God. And it is kind of mind-boggling that Solomon could allow this to happen with what God has blessed him with,
Then you go back to what Lynn was saying, surrounding himself with different types of influences. Sometimes you can be so into what you're into, but the influences are so heavy upon you, you forget and you take your eyes off of what they are originally supposed to be focused on because you're being influenced this way, that way, and every way. So his wisdom, kind of disintegrated because of the influences that he was around. And you can tell he was strongly influenced. He's building altars for these women.
And it happens over time. If he wanted to, correct it and get rid of all the, the foreign wives and all these things, he was so far along into it with being king that, he must have felt the pressure that he couldn't, correct it. So he just kept going down that rabbit hole and just getting deeper and deeper.
So he had everything a person could want, and I guess it was, he eventually decided he wanted what he knew he shouldn't have, and then some people get lured by that.
Mm-hmm.
And then, also, sometimes when you think you're strong enough to handle it. Yeah. I'm just wondering if Solomon think, well, I'm wise, I can handle this. But really, he couldn't. Because, like you said, the influence is stronger than the faith.
Yeah. And it can happen today in marriage today. It's very important. Teach our kids. When they pick a spouse. It's a godly person. Because I've seen many examples of somebody saying, "Well, I'm going to change this other person," and it's going the other way. So you got to be real careful. today, and who our companions are. Obviously, the most important companion, which would be our spouse.
And I would say it's a constant check. He may not even have realized he was thinking he was too strong. Or, I mean, even in the New Testament, it says, lest you drift away. No one's jumping towards the line.
Right.
But we're very guilty in all sorts of things. I'd say we know there's a line we shouldn't cross as Christians, but somehow I think over time the generations have tried to figure out how close we can be to the line and still say we're not going over. And
that's a good word you use there, is drift. That's what we use that in the aviation community, and drift. And over time, you just slowly start, going away from what the book says, and you find yourself doing things that are very non-standard. So.
I often wonder how come God didn't send a prophet to him like God did to David. Nathan. God spoke directly to him, but I kind of often wonder how come God didn't try to check him up with a prophet or something.
Right.
Well, if he was supposedly the wisest person in the world, he probably wouldn't have accepted the word of the prophet anyway.
I put together a slide here of a few of the false idols that are mentioned that Solomon ended up worshiping. We had Chemosh, god of the Moabites, which is mentioned in Jeremiah 48 later on. Molech, which I think we've all know about Molech, the god of the Canaanites, and he's warned about because this is just a picture of or drawing of Molech, and he was famous for being the god, the god of child sacrifice. And then Ashtoreth of the Sidonians, and Milcom of the Ammonites. These are four of the false idols that we see that Solomon starts following. Not only that, but he starts building high places of worship for them. I mean, he goes full tilt, whatever word you want to use. He just goes way off the grid here and just goes completely against God's commandments and starts worshiping these false idols. And then we see that he starts raising adversaries against them. God starts raising adversaries against them. You remember, David had a very time of a lot of war. He'd fight the Philistines a lot. But during Solomon's reign, it was very quiet, very peaceful, and he didn't promise. He was even told that was going to be a result. But now that we see that his disobedience and his turning against God, we see that God starts raising adversaries against them. And verse 11 says, "Therefore the Lord said to Solomon, since this has been your practice, and you have not kept my commandments and my statutes that I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom from you, and you will give it to your servants. Yet for the sake of David your father, I will not do it in your days, but I will tear it out of the hand of your son. However, I will not tear away all the kingdom, but I will give one tribe to your son for the sake of David my servant, and for the sake of Jerusalem that I have chosen." So what is it? What is this prophesying here talking about? Yeah, the divided kingdom we're talking about. You got the 10 tribes to the north, and who becomes the first king of the north? Jeroboam. Who said that? Oh, Jeroboam to the north, and who ends up being to the south? Rehoboam. And which one is Solomon's son? Rehoboam. And what is Jeroboam's job with Solomon? Anybody remember? His servant. This was his servant. We're gonna see this here in a minute here. But Solomon's servant was Jeroboam. That's one of the enemies. In the slide, actually. And so the ones that are mentioned here are Hadad, the Edomite. He was a child when he had been attacked, and they thought they had killed all the males of the Edomites, but he had escaped and had grown up, and he takes revenge. We see Rezin, the king in Damascus, that fought Solomon. And then we see an adversary as his own servant here. It's talking about his Jeroboam, the servant of Solomon. And he was told to be put to death, but he ended up fleeing to Egypt for the rest of Solomon's life, and then he's able to come back and actually serve as the first king of the northern kingdom. So what when we go down to the latter part of chapter 11, we see a man comes up to Jeroboam, Ahijah, and he actually approaches Jeroboam twice. This is the first time. He says, take for yourself, this is verse 31, take for yourself 10 pieces, for thus saith the Lord, the God of Israel, behold, I am about to tear the kingdom from the hand of Solomon, and will give you 10 tribes. We know there's 12 tribes, so we kind of mentioned about Benjamin last week. Benjamin isn't mostly with the southern kingdom, but they're remnants and part of the land, and with the northern kingdom. But I know the tribe of Benjamin always seems to be kind of off to the side a lot of times in the scriptures. But so we have Judah to the south, and we have all the northern kingdom of Israel. And this is God speaks to this man Ahijah to deliver this prophecy to Jeroboam and let him know that he's going to be part of this God's will here to have the kingdom divided as a consequence of Solomon's rejection of God. And then later on, this Ahijah shows up, and I can't remember the exact story, but it has to do with the son of Jeroboam going to die or something like that. So what do you think here? It would be nice. It'd be a good lead into a good segue to studying the divided kingdom, but I don't know if that's on the schedule for the next couple of years or not. But it is a good study if you've never done the study of the divided kingdom and the kings to the north and to the south, and all that goes on there. And that kind of ends. The end of Solomon dies here in the verse chapter 11, verse 43. He slept with his fathers and was buried in the city of David, his father, and Rehoboam, his son, reigned in his place. So Rehoboam takes over the kingdom, but then it's quickly stripped from him. At least 10 of the tribes go up to the north, and they're taken over by Jeroboam. Rehoboam becomes a very foolish man, and you can read on into chapter 12 and see the bad decisions that he starts making right away. I found any comments or questions on any of that?
Influence is so powerful.
Yeah,
children.
That's right. Yeah, and it doesn't matter the age, right? And Solomon was in his old age and was still, led astray. Wednesday will be a review for all of 1st and 2nd Samuel, so we probably won't go into King's reviews if you just did that. But you might want to bring your books for Wednesday night. Gary's going to do a review. I did find a quiz here about Solomon that kind of did a review, so I'm going to quiz everybody here. Most of the questions are pretty easy. There's a couple that we are a little bit harder, and some of them weren't even mentioned. But we'll see how smart, how your retention, your memory retention. Solomon's father. Where was Solomon anointed? Gihon. It's one of the G ones. Yeah. Which priest anointed Solomon?
Yeah.
I still haven't heard it. Zadok. For what gift did Solomon ask God? What large buildings did Solomon build? Yeah, that's an easy one. How long did it take Solomon to build his own house? 13 years. What did God say to him when he appeared the second time? That's kind of open-ended, kind of generic, but he's going to establish a throne in his kingdom forever. Who helped Solomon with his building project? Hiram of Tyre. What did the Queen of Sheba give to Solomon? Yeah, a lot. 120 talents of gold, spices, and precious stones. What weight of gold did Solomon acquire in 1 year? That was mentioned. 666. Yeah, I heard that. 666. Where's Clay? Not even here. What animals were carved on Solomon's throne? Lions. Very good, Dan. Lions. How many concubines did Solomon have? How many wives? No. Yeah, we mentioned that. 300, 700. From which country did Solomon import horses? Egypt. How long did Solomon reign over Israel? How many? 40, yeah. Which prophet told Jeroboam he would rule over 10 tribes? I just mentioned it 5 minutes ago. Ahijah. Yeah. Yeah, Ahijah. Which books of the Bible did Solomon write? Ecclesiastes, Proverbs, a lot of the Proverbs, Song of Solomon, probably. I put an asterisk there because they're songs and poems of him, of and about him, but whether he actually wrote himself, it's hard to tell. But it's all obviously from the Spirit, God's Spirit of God. What was the name of Solomon's son who succeeded him? Why did Solomon turn away from God when he was old? Yeah, his foreign wives turned his heart after other gods. That's what the scripture says. In the Song of Solomon, how is the lady's hair described? We didn't mention this, but does anybody remember ever? What's it? Oh, you're close, very close. As a flock of goats that appear from Galilee. Yes, very good.
That's what I aspire to.
Yeah. Does Clay mention that to you a lot? Yeah, okay. Complete this proverb. A word fitly spoken is like. What's that? Well, yeah, you're right. It's apples of gold and pictures of silver. I know there's a couple of people that knew those that we talked about. All right, well that's it. I appreciate everybody. I enjoyed doing the class here. I was a last minute fill in. I'm not sure if Gary was original. Gary's supposed to originally teach here with TUS, but I know I originally wasn't supposed to teach this class, and one of the teachers dropped out. And so, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. I appreciate everybody's participation. Y'all were a good audience and good students. And I think I learned more than anybody as usual. And Neil. Gary Perry, yeah, I know. I understand that. Trust me, I know that people always call me Gary when I introduce myself. All right, well, thank you. We're done a few minutes early, so. Thank you. Don't forget, if you need the Matthew books, are up here if you're in Matthew class next. Where's Andrew today?
He told me that Blaine made him drink too much tea.
Oh, really?
Everything happens in Blaine's fault.
Okay.
We stayed here with Blaine while I was in jail.
Okay.
Black and gray goes. He must be live streaming. All of a sudden he texted me and goes, "What did you just say?" Cross clan out too. Over your right shoulder. Crazy. Oh, I didn't see that either. He was saying that one. And the food was warm. That would be wonderful.
and Matthew?
Yeah,
Yeah, are you and Matthew? Oh, good. Yes.
This is Matthew, right? Okay. We supposed to mark our names out?
Oh, I didn't even notice that. Oh, I don't have glasses.
Hey, Uncle Warren, Darla, and Joe.
Thank you.
Hey,